we in the sort of modern evolved West are, a lot of us at least would think that we're beyond the sort of superstition that's engaged in that. But we are asking these like very profound, fundamental questions that a lot of people have thought about for a very long time, and a lot of that knowledge has been encoded into religions. And so I think the religious philosophical dimension of this is actually going to become very important. I think we as a society are going to have to really take these things seriously.
In what way? Like, in what way do you think religion is going to play into this?
In the same way that it plays in basically any. So religion historically is how we sort of transmit ethical and moral judgments, right? And then we basically sort of it's the sort of modern intellectual vanguard of the West 100 years ago, whatever, decided to shed religion as a sort of primary organizing thing, but we decided to continue to try to evolve ethics and morals. But if you ask anybody who's religious, what is the process of figuring out ethics and morals, they will tell you, well, that's a religion. And so Nietzsche would say we're just inventing new religions. Like we think of ourselves as highly evolved scientific people. In reality, we're having basically fundamentally philosophical debates about these very deep issues that don't have concrete scientific answers, and that we're basically inventing new religions as we go.
Well, it makes sense because people behave like a religious zealot when they defend their ideologies.
Yeah.
Like when they're unable to objectively look at their own thoughts and opinions on things because it's outside of the ideology.
Yeah. Yeah, the religious instinct runs very deep. Right?
Yeah, but is that a part of our operating system?
Yeah, I think so. It has something to, from what I've been able to establish from reading about this, it has something to do with basically what does it mean for individuals to cohere together into a group? And what does it mean to have that group have sort of the equivalent of an operating system that it's able to basically all agree on and prove to, members of the group are able to prove to each other that they're full members of the group.
And it seems universal?
And then they transmit, right? What religion does is it encodes ethics and morals. Right? It encodes lessons learned over very long periods of time into basically like a book, right? And a set, parables, right? And lessons, right? And, commandments and things like this. And then, 1,000 years later, people in theory, right, or at least are benefiting from all of this hard-won wisdom over the generations. And of course, the big religions were all developed pre-science, right? And so they were basically an attempt to sort of code human knowledge, pre-scientific human knowledge into something that was reproducible, even in an era where you didn't have mass literacy.
Do you think that's why most attempts at encoding morals and ethics into some sort of an open structure turn religious?
Yeah.
They almost all turn to this point where it seems like you're in a cult.
Yeah, you're basically. It's basically. Yeah, I think everything ultimately is I think basically all human societies, all structures of people working together, living together, whatever. It's sort of, they're all sort of very severely watered down versions of the original cults. Like if you go far enough back in human history, if you go back before the Greeks, there's this long history of the sort of development. I'm going to specifically talk about Western civilization here because I don't know much about the Eastern side. But Western civilization, there's this great book called The Ancient City that goes through this, and it talks about how the original form of civilization was basically it was a fascist communist cult. And this was the origination of the tribes and then ultimately the cities, which ultimately became states. And this is what I was describing earlier, which was like the Greek city-state was basically a fascist communist cult. It had a very concrete, specific religion. It had its own gods. People who were not in that cult, right, did not count as human, had no rights, and were to be killed on sight or could be like freely they had no trouble. They had no moral qualms at all about enslaving people or killing people who weren't in their cult because they worship different gods. They don't count.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was the original form of human civilization. And I think the way that you can kind of best understand the last, 4,000 years and even the world we're living in today is we have a millionth the intensity level of those cults. Like we've watered, even our cults don't compare to what their cults were like. Right. We have watered these ideas all the way down. Right. We watered the idea from that all-consuming cult down to what we called a religion and then now what we call whatever, philosophy or worldview or whatever it is. And now we've watered it all the way down to, CrossFit. So I view it as so in an important way. It's been a process of diminishment as much as it's been a process of advancement. But you're exactly right. Like you can see and this is actually relevant in a lot of the tech debates because you can see what happens, which is humans we want to be members of groups. We want to reform into new cults. We want to reform into new religions. We want to develop new ethical and moral systems and hold each other to them. By the way, what's a hallmark of any religion? Hallmark of any religion is some belief that strikes outsiders as completely crazy, right? What's the role of that crazy belief? The role is that by professing your belief in the crazy thing, you basically certify that you're a member of the group, right? You're willing to stand up and say, yes, I'm a believer.
Yes,
I have faith. Therefore, I'm a member of the group. Therefore, include me in the circle and don't
That's woke Twitter.
And yes, and so basically, woke Twitter has basically recreated. They are a non-spiritual religious cult.
Yes.
They exhibit all the same religious behaviors, right? They have excommunication.
Yes.
They have sin. They have redemption or lack thereof, right? They have original sin, right? Privilege, like
Proclamations of piety.
yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
By the way, they have they have church,
Yes.
DEI seminars, like right?
Yes.
They've got. They have recreated a form of basically evangelical Protestantism is in sort of structural terms like that. That's what they've actually done. Nietzsche actually predicted this. He said because Nietzsche wrote at the same time that Darwinism, right? Nietzsche wrote at the same time that Darwin was basically showing with natural selection that the physical world didn't exist necessarily from creation, but rather evolved, right? It wasn't actually 6,000 years old. It was actually 4 billion years old, and it was this long process of trial and error as opposed to creation that got us to where we are. And so Nietzsche said, this is really bad news, right? This is going to kick the legs out from under all of our existing religions. It's going to leave us in a situation where we have to create our own values. He said there's nothing harder in human society than creating values from scratch. It took thousands of years to get Judaism to the point where it is today. It took thousands of years to get Christianity. It took thousands of years to get Hinduism. And we're going to do it in 10, right, or 100.
But even the thousands of years that people did create various religions and got them to the point where they're at in 2022, they did it all through personal experience, life experience, shared experience, all stuff that's written down, lessons learned. I mean, wouldn't we be better suited to do that today with a more comprehensive understanding of how the mind works?